De regreso a las sendas antiguas.
Shalom to all of you. Welcome once again to this channel, Back to the Ancient Paths. Today we are going to address a biblical topic that we have reference to in the Hebrew Bible, and it has to do with the future third temple. We are going to take the opportunity here to give information that has to do with this concept that in Judaism we are waiting for a third temple that is going to be built. Something is related in the book of Ezekiel chapter 37 and also in the same book of Ezekiel from chapters 40 and 48. It speaks of a temple, and it really is a physical temple, nothing that has to do with spirituality. No, it is literally physical with this. We are also going to controvert and contradict the Christian Catholic affirmation based on the writings of the book of the letter to the Hebrews, which says that it refers to supposed sacrifices of Jesus as the only and last sacrifice, and we are really going to see that the temple that we are waiting for is going to have sacrifices, and there are going to be sacrificed for sin. So we are going to start now, and we are going to illustrate some concepts. 10 verse 10 says, verse 12, it is said, "But Christ, having offered once and for all a single sacrifice for sins, has sat down at the right hand of God." Obviously that this is wrong. Wrong has no foundation first, because no human being can die for the sins of humanity or for the sins of anyone else. It was not a sacrifice, as we have said before in other places, that the crucifixion of Jesus was not a sacrifice, it was a crucifixion. Because for it to have been a sacrifice in the context of Hebrew, it would have to, first of all, there are no human sacrifices in the Hebrew Bible, only animal sacrifices. Secondly, it does not meet the requirements to be considered a sacrifice, since it was not made in the temple in Jerusalem. Their blood was not shed in the inner part of the sanctuary. We caught them. The priests of the tribe of Levi, they did not take part in this ritual. So it is a completely separate thing. It was a crucifixion done by the pagan Romans outside the temple, and their blood was not shed in the sanctuary. So what the crucifixion of Jesus does not gather the requirements to be considered a sacrifice. So, as I said before, no human being can atone or die for the sins of another person. And what it says here in Hebrew is obviously contrary, because it says that now he has sat at the right hand of God. No one was sitting at the right hand of God, because God does not have a right hand or a left hand. He has no right or left. He does not have up or down. That is figurative language that is used in Scripture so that human beings can understand. But here, if it is based on Psalm 110:1, he is talking about something else. Here it is not talking about that no one is going to sit at the right hand of God. The right hand of God is a sign of protection that God gave to David. Then Psalm 110, on which verse 12 of chapter 10 of Hebrews is supposedly based, also has no foundation in the Bible, and it does not apply to Jesus either. Also, in Hebrews chapter 9 verse 28 says, "Likewise Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many, and will appear a second time without regard to sin, to save those who wait for him." This is another totally wrong concept. Why? Because, and apart from the fact that no human being can die for the sins of another, in the Hebrew Bible there is no mention of a Messiah coming twice at all, other than that Jesus did not meet the requirements of being the Messiah. Well, here we have to say one thing. Why the Hebrew scriptures predict that the temple in Jerusalem will be built, and the sacrificial services will resume still of sacrifice for sin. This restoration is one of the key developments that will obviously take place when the figure we are waiting for appears in Judaism of a Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, the true Jewish Messiah. There is a yes. We are going to the book of Ezekiel chapter 37. This is where the prophet is giving us a little light about what is going to come in the future. Says, "My servant David will be king over them, and there will be a single shepherd for all of them," referring to Israel. "They will follow my ordinances and keep my decrees and fulfill them. They will live in the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, in which our fathers lived. They, their children, and their children's children inhabit it. They will forever be in the land of Israel. And my servant David will be a leader for them forever. I will seal a peace covenant with them. It will be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will establish them and increase them, and put my sanctuary among them forever." To put the sanctuary means to put the temple again. So here we are told that if there is going to be another temple among them, there will be my dwelling, that is, God will inhabit his Shekinah, his presence will be there, I will be their God, and they will be my people. Then the nations of the earth will know that I am the Lord who sanitifies Israel, when my sanctuary is among them forever. Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 24 to 28. This is Ezekiel's prophecy about there going to be a sanctuary in the good future, so that someone doesn't suggest that the temple will be rebuilt in the Messianic era, but sacrifices will not be resumed. The Hebrew Bible unequivocally contradicts this statement. Then here we have another part in Isaiah 56:7. It says, "To these, I mean to Israel, these I will bring to my holy mountain." And obviously speaking of those people who obey and keep their commandments, "I will take them to my holy mountain, and I will rejoice their burnt offerings in my house of prayer." If speaking of burnt offerings, it is because there are going to be sacrifices, and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, because my house will be called a house of prayer for all peoples, Isaiah 56 verse 7. We also have another part in the same book of Ezekiel chapter 45 verse 17 and 18. Look at what it says. "And it will be the responsibility of the prince provide the burnt offerings, grain offerings, and drink offerings. He will prepare the sin offering, the meal offering, the burnt offering, and the peace offering to make atonement for the house of Israel." Ezekiel chapter 45 verse 17 to 18. Then there is going to be a temple, and there is going to be a prince who, in a certain sense, is sometimes interpreted as the Messiah, who is going to offer these burnt offerings to God. In Zephaniah chapter 3 verse 10 says, "Of beyond the rivers from Ethiopia, my worshippers, my dispersed will bring my offerings, the sacrifices." And in Zechariah 14:21 it says, "And every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah will be consecrated to the Lord of hosts, and all those who sacrifice will come and take from them and boil them in them." Zechariah 14:21, Malachi chapter 3 verse 3 to 4, "And he will sit as a smelter and purifier of silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi and refine them as savings in silver, so that they present offerings to the Lord in righteousness. Then the offering of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to the Lord, as in the days of old and as in years past." And we know that chapters 40 to 48 of the book of Ezekiel deal with the third temple that will be built in the future Messianic era, and the sacrifices that were offered at that time, including sin offerings, according to many comments, the prince spoke of in these chapters possibly refers to the Messiah, who will be in charge of offering some of these sacrifices at the altar. When ordering Ezekiel to describe the dimensions of the temple to the Jewish people, God tells him to look what God says to Ezekiel. "Your son of man describes the house or the temple to the house of Israel, so that they may be ashamed of their iniquities who look at their plan. And if they are ashamed of everything they have done, they should know the shape of the house or the shape of the temple and its scheme, its exits, its entrances, and all its forms, and all its laws, and all its teachings. And I wrote, see it in their sight, so that they keep all its form and its laws and comply with them." Then God himself gave the order to Ezekiel to inform the people about this temple, of the structure of the temple. Now, although this temple appears in a highly symbolic book, there are many reasons to believe that it is a real physical reality and not a merely spiritual phenomenon, as it says in Christianity. Chapters 40 or 48. Firstly, the construction of this temple is described in precise detail with precise measurements, and not in any symbolic terms. The exact measurements of the wall of the atrium and the sanctuary are provided to the reader, as well as all the other elements of the construction. In addition, the description is intensely visual. Such meticulous consideration, point by point, invites comparison, not with purely symbolic visions. An indisputably literal building is the most important thing, is that Ezekiel is told that he describes the temple that the people have seen of Israel. That is what we just read a moment ago. If the temple is only figurative, then this would be a nonsensical statement. But if it is literal, all difficulty is removed on this basis. A literal interpretation is preferable, even if it does not provide all the answers it does not have. And as I said before, that contradicts what Hebrews chapter 10 and chapter 9 says about the supposed sacrifice of Jesus for the sins of humanity, that my was sacrificed, nor did he die for the sins of anyone. Architecturally, the dimensions provided in chapters 40 to 48, they do not correspond to any of the previous temples. In other words, the first and second temples are the Temple of Solomon, and the second temple is the Temple of Zerubbabel. In addition, the general design is markedly different from that of the historical temples. Topologically, the Temple of Ezekiel presents a river that flows to the east from the threshold of the temple towards the Jordan Valley. Chapter 47, verse 1, when you are in Christianity, Catholicism, go to Revelation, you will see that they speak of a river that was taken from here by Ezekiel This is where they got it from. So what did they do in Revelation? They Christianized what the Jewish prophets said, but the Jewish prophets were not talking about any Christ of any Jesus. Also, the surrounding geography described by Ezekiel is different from Israel today or any time in the past. Theologically, the mode of worship and priestly services followed in Ezekiel's temple. Although it parallels that of the Mosaic economy in numerous details, it has never been carried out by Israel at any time in the past. The situation described on earth, it is an idyllic theocracy never before experienced by the nation. More significantly, this temple contains the glory of God. The Jewish rabbis agree that the glory of God withdrew from the temple. If you go to Ezekiel chapter 8 to 10, you see that Ezekiel is narrating how the glory of the temple in Jerusalem left through the eastern gate of the temple. And here it turns out that in this temple, that is, which Ezekiel is talking about in chapters 40 to 48, he is recounting that the glory of God is going to return again through the same door through which it left before the destruction of the first temple, before the invasion of Babylonians then. Here we have something that the same prophet narrates, the moment in which the Shekinah, the divine presence, exits through the eastern gate of the temple of Jerusalem when Ezekiel was alive and when he was speaking of the Babylonian invasion of Jerusalem and the destruction of Jerusalem. And now he is reporting that this divine presence is killed, returns to the temple through the same door that it left through the eastern gate. This is incredible. It is incredible good for that. Whether the glory of God will return as prophesied to Ezekiel must be some other future temple, having established Ezekiel's temple as both literal and future. Then we are faced with the question of when precisely this temple comes into existence. It is true that this is a difficult issue to resolve at first, because there are many similarities between the millennial kingdom and the eternal state. But let's just say that it cannot be an eternal state, because the eternal state is a spiritual state. It is another dimension, so it is very likely, and most likely it will be in a time of a messianic age. So millennial kingdom, there is no messianic age, which is what the prophets speak of in the Hebrew Bible, the reasons. So what about the sacrifices? One may well wonder if Ezekiel's temple is in fact literal future and messianic age nature. So what are the temple sacrifices for that is a question asked in Christianity, but another temple and more sacrifices. So what did Jesus do? Well, what Jesus did really has no value in light of the Hebrew scriptures. It has no foundation. It does not have it right. So we want to say that this issue of the temple, of the third temple that is going to be built, is something that Christianity and Catholicism have never been able to answer. But they write and write and write and calculate and draw concepts that end with a spiritualism or symbolism. But we have seen that this future third temple has nothing symbolic about it, nothing spiritual about it. It is merely literal. It is a physical temple to which God was not going to take 8 chapters to give Ezekiel instructions of an imaginary temple that does not have. So we have to get used to thinking and adopting what the Hebrew Bible says, because the Hebrew Bible is the highest authority. When it comes to biblical writings, the Hebrew Bible is divinely inspired. The Torah was given by prophecy to Moses. The prophets wrote according to the Torah. And the writings of the Hebrew Bible agree with both the prophets and the Torah. So there is a balance then, that is the biblical authority. The New Testament has no authority whatsoever because it was written by human beings. Greek or Judeo-Greeks was not written in Hebrew, which is the Jewish language. The sacred language has no divine inspiration because it has many errors. The New Testament is riddled with errors. Many errors were intentionally fabricated to create a false message from a first-century Jewish preacher. And that is where the famous religions of Catholicism and Christianity arose, that later Paul elevated them, making the figure of Jesus a character that never existed. So I'm going to end here with this topic. I will weave it with many questions. Please write, ask, and study, because if you do not study, you are not going to ask if you want to ignore this. Pass on the information you already have, because it has already been given here on this channel. And that is one of our responsibility, to be a light to the world, give it the correct information. So I leave you with this topic. I hope you can investigate more about it, and all the comments you may have about it are welcome. So we will see each other another time. Thank you very much. Shalom.